Hi, guys, and welcome to the Women's Health Summit, where you are gaining clarity so you can lead with confidence and finally turn that passion into profit. I'm Laura Sherrill, a high-performance women's health coach and the founder of Balance Bombshells, and today I'm here with Alyssa Chang, a brain-based health and movement coach. With over 8 years studying neuroscience, she works with clients on improving their connection between their brain and body so they can heal their metabolism, rewire their mindset, and move pain-free. Alyssa is also a collegiate volleyball player and has past experience as a figure competitor. Alyssa, I'm so excited you're here. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh my gosh, thank you. I'm just as excited.
Yeah. We've just been geeking out over like the mind-body connection, brain chemistry, and how much it impacts everything. So what I'd love to know first is how you got started in your business and why.
Ooh, such a great question. This is always such a funny story. So as you mentioned, I played volleyball. So I grew up as an athlete and always just had that natural kind of gravitation towards performance and challenging myself, and then also learning how to better support my body. So I ended up studying kinesiology, and getting my section was definitely focused on exercise and nutrition. And there was this fitness manager that came into one of my classes, and he just talked about his gym and how he was really wanting to be there to help everyone kind of get their foot in the door. And I was like, wow, he was so genuine, so nice. I reached out to him and said, hey, I would love to brainstorm with you. What are job opportunities looking like after I graduate? And so we met, we talked, and he's like, oh, I want you to come back and meet my other manager. And I was like, okay. So I came back, and then literally in that second meeting, I was in my sweatshirt, sweatpants. And I was like, holy moly, this is an interview. And I was like, oh, and I was like, I am getting interviewed to become a trainer. And so I literally stumbled into the career of working with people and being of service, but it was so aligned. And I feel so grateful because I have not switched my job. I have always been in some form of one-on-one contact, service, helping people better their lives through movement. Fitness is basically my vehicle to help people get better clarity on what matters to them, but also build that confidence around how their body works, how their brain plays a role in that. And then just creating a lot of self-assurance and confidence in who they are.
Right. I think that confidence piece is so huge. If you're not confident with yourself, your abilities, I think it makes you doubt yourself and makes you not take the action you're supposed to, whether it's fitness or food or action in your job, dating, literally anything.
Totally.
So it's just, I love the fact that you've been able to bring the brain chemistry with the physical elements, because I'm a huge fan of fitness. I honestly don't know where I would be without it. If I'm kind of like a dog, if I don't move, you're just, you need to go outside for a walk. Something's happening right now.
Move yourself.
Yeah. And then you're also one of the few people I've talked to who hasn't done a career change.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I don't think I just thought this was what people did. And then the more people I talked to, they would be, in search of what fulfilled them. And for me, I was like, wow, I'm just really grateful that it kind of happened. But I think there was clarity around, I just followed what made my life enjoyable. It was learning more about the foods that we eat and how it impacts your gut health connected to your brain health, and how that impacts your behaviors and your emotional state. And so it was I just was always wanting to be a learner. And as a coach, you can never learn enough. You can never know too much. You're always being humbled on a daily basis of an article that comes out, new certification. So it kind of just pulled me in that direction of always essentially being a student in my craft. Yeah.
I love that. Cause I was the opposite. I ended up in fundraising, but because I loved being of service, I just loved it's interesting that it was a natural fit for that part of my career, but I planned a lot of events because I loved just creating something fun for people to enjoy. But I learned on my own path how much I needed to manage my stress levels. So nobody tells you how to do that when you're in college, even though they I think try. Sometimes you have to be on your own journey to figure out what burnout is and how to support your body through food. I was over exercising on top of my work schedule. So that caused a lot of stress hormones to just get into the brain and just make you feel more overwhelmed.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's no fault to us too, right? Because I think a lot of times, because we're not modeled or coached enough about what is stress and how does that express in your unique body, not
Right.
necessarily correlative to like other people.
Right.
And it's like, we're literally doing the best we can until all of a sudden our body's like, hey, you need to stop and take a nap. And then we're like
Right.
sick or, whatever happens.
Right.
Like, oh, I need to adjust something.
Right. And I did not understand it. And like, no one ever talked to me about, and I think you're a perfect person to talk about this because you're a former athlete. No one ever told me what would happen if you exercise too much. And like, I didn't know what that threshold was. So I would just keep going and going and going, face plummet, and then just keep going and going and going. Nobody
You're like, I feel kind of better.
Yeah, I did not rest. So it was just really interesting. And like, I'm sure you end up working with a lot of women, especially from your background in fitness, who probably feel the same way.
Completely. And this week my theme is I'm having a lot of conversations around rest, and like, it's very multifaceted, and it's like the combination of physical rest, but sometimes when we physically move into stillness, it's our mind that cannot halt, right? So when we're physically still, we start not hearing, but we start to just play out like all this anxiousness, all this internal chatter of like, you're being lazy, unproductive. What are you doing? You're wasting time, right? It's all that conversation that when we think about resting our body, it's like, cool, I can like stay still, but what ends up happening to like my thoughts? Do they become louder? And how do we then understand what rest actually means for you?
Right.
Because recovery and rest are so essential, but we're typically shown like one way to do it, which is like sit on the couch and watch Netflix. But what if for you, rest is like a nice walk in the sunshine and then coming home and then doing a little bit of movement that just regrounds you.
Right.
So it's so individual. And I think that's like part of my work is like, your body so well. Let's explore that and let's get some data of how you're really responding to rest, different forms of rest.
And I love your approach too, because I think there's a lot of noise on the market for like, you have to do it this way or you're not going to get results. And like, I always challenge women on like, people are always trying to sell you something, but like nothing ever works unless you figure out how it's going to work for you. Because like, especially the data, a lot of like fitness studies are done on the male body and then are projected onto the female. And it's like, well, our bodies are clearly not on the male structure. We have way different needs. And like, it's just really interesting of how much we have to be able to challenge what people say and really tune into us. And I think, I don't know if this happens in your work too, where women are looking for a quick fix. We're all looking for the cheapest, quickest route to get the results that we want. But I think, it's a lifestyle change, mind, body, soul, to be able to stick with it.
Totally. It's just a much harder process. And it's like, I also understand, right? Like that people want the quickest way to like heal their bodies and have that very neutral relationship. And, for me, it really goes to show that they're just in a lot of discomfort, right? They're just in a lot of questioning. Typically the self-blame is very heavy. And that's why I take like a neuroscience background of like, you have nothing, I don't want you to blame yourself. And here are all the reasons scientifically as to why your body's trying to work with you, for you, et cetera.
Right.
And so once they can kind of like remove that, then the timeline matters less, right? Because they're like trying to be much more understanding of like, oh, when she's tired, it's probably because I worked 12-hour days, 3 days in a row, and I forgot lunch every single day, whatever it is.
Right.
I'm more compassionate to like, wow, she is really showing up for me.
Right. And I think too, like when you were talking about the mental chatter kind of getting in our brains when we physically rest, I always see that as an opportunity that we need to challenge what our thoughts are. Like we have some work to do on our mindset. So I love that you bring in the mindset work with, certainly like the science behind the brain, but also like the body with food and movement, because they all go together. And like, it's really hard sometimes, like even just like being on social media, because you're just like, oh gosh, like these people just need to chill out. Like you could have some work to do on what is driving you. And like, it's an opportunity to challenge that versus, quieting it in some way. So either it's through movement where you're not stopping, it's overeating because you can't feel, it's working yourself to the ground because you don't want to feel. So it's basically finding all of these things outside of ourselves to numb away. Even scrolling through social media can be one of those things because your brain turns off.
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
the reward center keeps popping up.
Totally. And it's like, that quick distraction, right? And I always tell clients like, distraction is definitely like of value at times when you're really trying to work on healing kind of those types of narratives that replay in our head. Like distraction can be helpful, but like how you're mentioning, like sometimes like sitting with what you're actually saying to yourself and like really hearing those words, and then being able to like, I like how you use the word of like it being an opportunity. It's like really that invitation to be like, hey, these are all the things that you've been able to distract yourself from, and now here they are. And it's not necessarily like you have to quickly reframe them or you have to do all these things, but it's like if you can become aware, like you are exponentially in a much better position to become much more of that compassionate, self-assured, confident person,
Right. And then when you think about like the brain and the body, like what fascinates you the most about the connection between the two?
Uh, well, I think it goes, for me personally, I struggled with a lot of like anxiety. When I competed in figure competitions, I went through that huge metabolic damage journey, and I had a lot of self-blame. I had a lot of like, overwhelm. I had a lot of confusion with like doing everything correctly and my body just having its own plan of action,
Right.
essentially. And so when I started to learn about like the different structures and lobes of the nervous system and what their roles were and how much of those parts of my nervous system just weren't working well together, they were either like inactive from lack of usage, from things like moving our eyes. I talk extensively about why it's so valuable to like move your eyes and train your visual system because it's so correlative to different manifestations of our behaviors, whether it's anxiety, it's depression. There's these structures in our brain that when they become dormant or inactive, or maybe it's the whole process that they're not integrating the information properly. Like what if you had the drills and the tools to actually activate these parts, and then managing your anxiety and like hearing these internal thoughts and the narratives, it was much easier, and I was such a mindset of being an athlete, like everything has to be hard, I have to push hard. And when I started learning about the brain, I was like, so you're saying that I can do a few vision drills, do my breathing, and I would feel less anxious without having to like step in front of my anxiety and being like, okay, what are you going to tell me today? It was more
Right.
about this like healing process of really working at the very root of it with my nervous system. And for a lot of the clientele that I work with do struggle with anxiety and overwhelm. And, what I constantly see in a lot of their movements is there's two structures of the brain that should work together to inhibit like anxiety and overwhelm. And when I notice that someone has a hard time with that, I do some movement assessments that tells me a lot about, their behaviors make sense because these two structures aren't actually working well together.
I love that. Because like I definitely have struggled with like an overactive nervous system. Like I can tell, like especially in social situations, sometimes I'm more introverted, so like having too much stimuli causes my body to immediately tense up. So I have to like very consciously tell myself it's safe, like relax your body down. But when I had first moved to New York City, like post college, I had like anxiety attacks being on the train because I was not used to having so many people in my personal space. And I did not grow up learning how to handle that type of like overactive nervous system basically being sparked.
Yeah. And there's so many ways that we receive information, and so for someone like, and I tend to attract a lot of introverts too in my line of work. And it's like, what's fascinating is when we start to really honor that natural intuition of ourselves, it's like, you take your body, you put yourself in like the mall, on Christmas Eve at 10 p.m. right? Like, it's like,
like
you're
getting anxious.
you're already getting that secondhand anxiety. And that's literally your body like upregulating to a certain degree so that it's like, okay, we need to leave, right? Because your heart rate's increasing, you're getting anxious, you feel that tension, that stiffness develop. Some of my clients will get pain signals, and pain is just it's just your brain's way of like checking in with you and poking you and being like, hey, can you address something and like maybe change your behavior, And so it's like, okay, I'm going to leave the mall. I'm going to sit in my car, that I'm not going to turn on the radio, and I'm going to drive in silence, right? Because you just need that type of like relaxation. And you use the word safety, which I use all the time in my work, is because your brain just wants to keep you safe.
Right. Right. And like, but we don't always know that. We just think like, because like I'm definitely like looking back when I would be in those situations, and I've noticed this with a lot of women too, you project your anxiety onto something else. So you just think like, well, I'm just really stressed with work, or like, oh, I'm just so angry at my boyfriend for doing X, Y, and Z. And it's like, no, your body is just so tense right now. So it's so interesting of how much it even drives our emotions. So that mindfulness that you were talking about before and how important that is. What have you noticed? Like, have you noticed any mental blocks that come up with women who have a lot of body image issues? Because I know like body image with women, it's such a huge issue. So have you noticed any mental blocks that come up with women who struggle with poor self-esteem or body image?
Yeah, when it comes to body image, I mean, typically it was something we picked up like when we were younger, some common, it could have been a positive one too, right? Like, wow, you're so beautiful. You have really strong legs or whatever it is, right? And, you know, we basically start with a thought, which then transitions into our beliefs, which then starts changing the way we act and behave. So if we got complimented on our beauty or our aesthetics, we now start to associate it, just the way that the nervous system works, with that now setting the foundation of how we basically are valued in the world. And so when we, you know, again, whenever that happened, however we basically picked up that data and set our belief system, we tend to carry that with us into adulthood until we're then starting to recognize that our behaviors are now manifested in how can I control my food when maybe other areas of my like business are feeling, you know, like, especially as entrepreneurs, it's hard to control everything. So it's like you start noticing your control tendencies manifest in like, especially trying to control the way you eat, the way you move, your body. And that's like usually the first line of action that I see a lot of women take is when life feels unsteady. It's like, how can I control my physical being? And the way that the nervous system works is because it's always, you know, routing us towards survival. If it feels so much threat and so much fight or flight, it's not going to change anything aesthetically, because that on its tier of priorities is going to be at the very, very bottom. It's like, I need to make sure her temperature is okay. I need to make sure her heart is beating. I make sure she's like getting a hunger signal so she's not depleted of fuel. So it's like your aesthetic goals will always take like a back seat when it comes to your entire life being unsteady or feeling very threatening.
Right. I love that you bring that up too, because like when our bodies are so much in that fight or flight mode, like our stress hormones are raging. And like, I have to talk to women a lot about calming down their stress hormones because it clings onto weight and fluid to protect the body. So it's like, sometimes women aren't really gaining weight, they're gaining stress. And especially if they're noticing it in their midsection, it's like, okay, then let's work on calming that down. So it's nice that you're able to bring in so many different components, I think, for women to be able to understand the connection.
And something I always mention is like, what if it's not about the food that you're eating or how much of it you're eating? What if it's not about how many calories you're burning or how many days you go to the gym? What if it's literally about doing so much less so that your body, so you can feel back into your body in a way that your body is then like, oh, she can now hear what I'm trying to tell her. I see her taking it slower. And for most of, again, the women I work with, how I healed my body as well was like, I had to rule out every traditional form of like how you get your body back essentially. And I just had to work on really like managing my own, like I call it a threat bucket, but like you're a threat bucket of like what's in there, right? Like how was I sleeping? Was I even sleeping? What was I even thinking or telling myself as I was eating food? Because how we relate to food, like, you know, if you're already telling yourself like, this is bad for me, I'm a bad person for eating this, you're already creating those stress responses in your brain that gets fed down to your gut. And then they have like this nice kind of like loop that they communicate to one another. Your body is going to have a very stressed response to the food, even if you're not sensitive to it. What if it's not about the food, right? What if it's about you being grateful for having like a wonderful meal in front of you and practicing gratitude in a way that it changes, like you talk about chemistry, it changes that hormonal pathway that you can just feel just so much more relaxed.
Yeah. Cause I definitely am with you where I believe our thoughts have so much power to how our bodies function, especially with that brain chemistry loop to our adrenal glands that like either tell our body we're safe and secure to not produce any more stress hormones, or, hey, I'm out at the mall or I'm eating foods that I know I shouldn't and I'm beating myself up about it, or, you know, and just like constantly having that chatter in your brain.
Yeah.
basically changes the chemistry within our body.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's really powerful too, and maybe you can touch on this, is the empowerment that we then have, knowing that we actually have control over how our body is functioning.
Yeah. I mean, the great thing is, like I think, being in control is often like condemned or like, that's such a bad thing. You should be flexible and go with the flow. But like, to be honest, neurologically, like our brain is always trying to keep us alive. And it does so by predicting what's coming up next. And a huge predictive measure is like somewhat correlative to like having quote unquote control, right? And so when my clients are craving and seeking control, if they can predict what their body's going to respond to when it comes to a high intense exercise, not sleeping well, and they know the pattern that happens and manifests in their body, it's like a huge, like, again, I use the word, sometimes there's a lot of guilt or self-blame.
Mm-hmm.
What if you attribute it to like, oh, this is why, my body does this and my brain's showing up like this, and this is the common outcome. You can almost like move into your day with quote unquote more control over what is going to happen. And that's so alleviating, right? Because it's like, it's not my fault. Like, it's literally like when I don't sleep well, I'm going to start to crave more carbs because I need more energy and I'm going to have to work a lot, so it's just, it all starts to just make sense. And like, for me, when I was struggling a lot, like that was just a huge transition in me better understanding myself and my behaviors, and then moving into the space of like healing.
Mm-hmm. So I teach, have you heard of cycle syncing, where you like partner? So it's when, it's like a term in functional medicine where you partner your food, your fitness, your daily activities to what phase you're in for your monthly cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So as a control freak, like super type A, I actually really like cycle syncing because it allows you to predict what your brain chemistry is going to be across your cycle. So there's certainly like foods you can do, a lot of like fitness stuff where it's like on parts of the cycle, we're going to be more resilient to stress. So you can do harder, tougher workouts.
Mm-hmm.
The week before and during our period, we're less resilient to stress. So it's time to like scale back the workouts. But I definitely have noticed the brain chemistry changes and the predictability in what my mood would be, my mindset, the energy levels. And like that to me feels like it gives me like control over and being able to predict of like what's going to happen.
Totally. And in business, right? When we're like
Oh my gosh.
entrepreneurs, it's
Yeah.
like, give me as much prediction as you can, as possible.
Yeah.
So I feel more settled in what I'm doing, who I'm serving. And
Right.
there was something I read where, like even in your creative work as a businesswoman, it's like looking at like, where are you in your cycle and when do you want to start launching,
Yes.
right? Like
Yeah.
when do you want to start going into creative
Yes.
mode and content creating and brainstorming, and how do you line that up with your hormones?
Yeah.
And when you think about it, it's like my I had an acupuncturist years ago, and he's like, as women, you guys are just so powerful because of your hormones. And I was like, I love the way you said that.
Yeah.
It makes sense, because the same way we're more resilient, like you said, to stress, we can push our body physically more.
Yes.
Which probably means we're also more resilient to other stressors when it comes to going into a launch or things like that.
Yeah. And like, you might actually really like learning about it because like the brain hemispheres shift like with our cycle. So like what will happen, and I definitely noticed this for me as I was working through it, the right and left brain hemispheres become the most aligned during our period. So it actually makes us more aware of like how we're living our lives and whether it's serving us or not. So kind of like how you talked about our bodies always trying to like serve us for its greater good, our cycle is actually driving us to be there. So like before a woman's period, our brain hemispheres are like shifting back together, but that's when she'll start noticing and nitpicking in her life, her appearance, her partner, her work, like literally, and like you can just predict it to a T. So I'll watch like reality shows, and I was like telling my husband, and I was like, I think she's about to get her period, because you can just see like the common patterns, but then you can use it for so much empowerment. So like during my period, before I like started doing this work, I started getting really uncomfortable, really angry, really upset. And it was because I wasn't taking action to leave my full-time job to do this full-time. And so it was just very much a guiding, like kind of like your internal guidance system of like, if I don't say yes to what I truly desire, I'm going to continually having huge mood swings and period problems. Like, I really wish someone told me that when I was younger. But
oh my God, right? Like, I mean, there's so much, even like, with my background in like training myself physically for volleyball, like, and I never knew that there was like seasons, right? Seasons where you're like thriving, you're not going to get injured, right? You're less likely to get injured, I should say. And like, you're going to be more quote unquote in control of your moods and like, just like kind of go with the flow. But it's just, I mean, when you start to really understand the female body and how much of it, like, we can, like you said, like use to our advantage, it's like, wow, we're going to be like really unstoppable.
I know. And so like, it's just so awesome for women to be able to recognize that. And that's why I was really excited to do this summit, because if we're each going to be able to help so many women, but what if all these other women that are watching this are able to then help so many other women? And like,
oh my gosh, yeah.
It's just, women need so much help right now in terms of our emotions, in terms of how we're connecting with ourselves. The emotions that you were talking about, I've noticed as a common theme of like guilt, shame, overwhelm, anxiety. Like, it's driving so much of our lives. And I always tell women, like, think of how much you've accomplished with all of these things. Like, we're already crushing it. What would happen if you use those to your advantage more and like was able to calm it down? Like, literally, like you said, like, we'll be unstoppable, because women are basically taking over the world slowly and surely.
The end.
Yeah, poor men. But have you noticed, like, in your work, that some women's like thought patterns and even food predictions, fitness stuff goes with their monthly cycle? Have you noticed that at all?
Oh, completely. I mean, there's like, it's funny that I do a group coaching program, and you know, there's always this kind of like panic. It manifests as like panic, right? Like, I'm frustrated. I decided to step on the scale randomly, right? And like, all my body change. I'm feeling like I'm not making progress, right? So all these very self-defeating internal thoughts, all of a sudden, where you felt so confident that they were kind of like removed, all of a sudden get like steamrolling into like your frontal cortex, right? And you're starting to think about all the time. And so for me, like, I just like, you know, gently kind of guide them, coach them, ask them questions. And then, I mean, it's like pretty high percentage where I'm like, where are you on your cycle? And they're like, well, I'm supposed to get it every day now, you know, or like, it's just like so correlative. And like, I notice that for myself too, when I start to like, it's really funny that you mentioned that, because I'm on my period now. And what I've noticed every time I'm getting closer to my cycle is I do start to have some of those internal conflicts of like what I'm doing. And is this the way that I actually want my business to grow and scale, and how I want to deliver a message? And I tend to have kind of just more conversations internally, which then probably is not as helpful. I should probably journal. But then I move more into this, like, just a little bit more nitpicky on stuff that I'm doing, right? A little more self-doubt. And that's, I mean, like you and I, while we preach and we do all this work, like, we're not also immune to having pockets of, oh, I'm feeling overwhelmed, or I'm feeling stressed out. Yeah.
Well, and it's so definitely journaling helps. And it becomes like, so when I talk to my clients now, they're like, oh, I'm so excited to get my period, to be able to figure out like what I need to do for the month ahead. Like, you can literally use it as like your check-in point to be like, okay, how was it this month? What was I irritated about? What do I feel like I need to change? What do I think will really make me happy? And that, like, it becomes more of a plan of action versus life sucks, or like, you know, like, and also
or
like,
not being aware too, right? Like, I don't know why, like, but I move into these like very depressive states every month or whatever it is, you know? And it's like, again, that predictive ability. And I'm such a believer in assessing and reassessing. And that's like such a good prompt. Like, every month you're basically taking inventory of like, well, what did we learn? Like, what can we tweak, you know?
Instead of, because I used to be that woman where I didn't understand that connection yet, and I would place blame in my external world. And I was like, oh, I need to figure this out. Like, this is damaging my relationships. This is making me less than happy about what I really do have to be grateful for. But something you might like too is before our period, serotonin dips, which is one of our feel-good hormones, which makes us go into that self-doubt mode and make us nitpick and like tear apart our appearance, our lives, basically. So there are foods you can eat to boost serotonin. So like dark chocolate, which we all know we love, right? Like, dark chocolate helps, chia seeds, dark turkey meat, like all of those things can actually make us feel emotionally better within like 20 minutes. So
Mhm.
I always like come prepared knowing, hey, I understand that my brain chemistry is going to dip a little bit. What can I use in my life to prepare knowing that that's going to happen? Um,
Totally.
it happens less now than it used to, thankfully.
Yeah. In the program that I teach, I have a whole guidebook on fueling for your cycle. So
Yeah.
it breaks down like what you're talking about, like the, predominant hormones that get released and
Yes.
like what they're responsible for, and the foods that if and when you're starting to feel more moody, irritable,
Yes.
if you're really symptomatic from the standpoint of getting like really bad cramps or lower back pain, like how can we better supplement your body in a way that you do create resiliency? And what the great thing is like you could just ask, we could ask this whole demographic, right? Like, what do you know to be true about your cycle, like the week
Yes.
before? How do you feel? And everyone, I mean, the thing is like what I pride myself in as being a coach is like, I believe that a lot of women know themselves. It's just you're not given the adequate tools or
Yes.
conversation to believe that what you know is actually very true about your body, because
Yes.
everyone's telling you to question it, right? No, you're not hungry. You're just dehydrated. No, you're,
Right.
like all this stuff. And it's so hard to buffer and filter. But
Yeah.
like, imagine if you had a conversation, right? Where someone was sitting across from you and be like, oh, tell me more. Like, tell
Yeah.
me more about your cycle on your first day and how you really want to rest and slow down,
Right.
And it's like, I just believe that, like, again, we're so powerful, we're so intuitive, but we've
Yeah.
just been steered wrong by society in a
All the
way that we
time.
question ourselves,
Yeah.
that, yeah.
So I used to have PMDD, which is like PMS symptoms times 10, where I had more of the emotional reactivity. So like my stress hormones were so high that I wasn't having enough progesterone, which is a very calming hormone before
Yeah.
our period happens. So I'm still amazed. So right now I have I don't get PMS issues. I no longer get like cramps. Like I'm still amazed of how much you're able to use food and your lifestyle to basically
Yeah.
support your body. So now I'll tell women before my period now, I feel like super zen, like just stress just rolls right off, like nothing seems to bother me. I actually feel the most grounded and calm before my period. And then my period comes and I'm like, oh, it
It's
just happens to be
yeah.
here. And like, I actually sometimes get so high energy during my period where I'll feel like I'm in the ovulation phase. And I'm like, this is just so unlike what it used to be. Like
Oh
it
my
is.
God. And that's like the beauty of healing,
Yeah.
right? Is like you're really like, if you have a good coach and like a system, like the body and the symptoms that you have, you don't have to stay there. You don't have to feel stuck,
Right.
like you are a great embodiment of that example of like, oh, it's here, but I feel
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
Because it did not used to be. I had like labor-like contraction menstrual cramps, like super terrible. But so I love alternative medicine. So it sounds like you do too with like your
Yeah.
acupuncturist. So she explained it so well. And because I used to go to acupuncture the week before my period because I knew like it's going to help promote more blood flow. And a lot of cramps stem from like blood stagnation in the uterus. So going to acupuncture helps like move the system a little bit. So they explained it so well of like when you're having those aggressive feelings before your period, it's like the blood is feeling like blocked and aggressively, like that's how you're feeling agitated in your mind. So then a
Mhm.
lot of women will feel better when their period starts because the blood starts flowing. So I was like, okay, that makes so much more sense. Like, what can I do to get that blood, promote that blood flow before my period starts to alleviate that aggressive type feelings? So acupuncture is certainly one. Exercise. Beets are huge for like promoting blood circulation. So I know a lot of athletes will use like beets for endurance and stuff. So I'll put them in smoothies before my period. And I'm like, I swear that helps me alleviate menstrual cramps. Like something so
Yeah.
simple, but like, how can we be a little bit more strategic and use all these things that we
Totally.
have available, but nobody teaches us this. So like,
Totally. And like for, it was interesting for me. I've always had very subtle, like manageable, like if anything, little cramp. And then like literally this last year, I was like, what is happening to my body? And I would get like cold sweats. I even threw up a few times. And I was like,
mm,
well, and in my head, right, as a coach, I'm like, well, now at least I know what my clients feel like, when they
yeah,
explain that they have really bad
yeah,
symptoms. But then I took a step out of my body and I overseed everything. And I was like, what has drastically shifted in my life that's making myself feel so stressed, so
right,
fragile, so responsive and reactive to my hormones?
yeah,
And it was like, yeah, I was like, not managing my stress well. My diet was probably a little bit not aligned with what I needed. My movement needed to be tweaked a little bit. So, when we talk about like strategies, like the way you breathe is such a huge window for me to understand, like, yeah, how resilient are you to stressors? What are the foods that you're going to be craving as a result of either being a more over breather or someone that does more nasal breathing? Like, these are all just very great lenses for me to better understand, like, how you manifest symptoms and also what behaviors kind of arise from improper breathing mechanics. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, a lot of us don't breathe well because of, the inactivity, the way that our environment is set up, being on screens and things like that. But when we talk about, like, again, kind of healing yourself from the inside and how it expresses itself outwards, it's like your breath is one of the most powerful things to get
Yeah.
you back into your body, back into parasympathetic.
Yeah. I notice that too, especially when you're like an entrepreneur, you're the one who has to make stuff happen and move things forward. So that can be very much like a pressure on your body. So hearing you talk about breath, like I have become very aware of the times when I'm not breathing and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, like, okay, like it's time to breathe. I'll like turn off the computer, sit and just like do a meditation for 10 minutes and really just try to align that breathing, knowing that I need that oxygen, you need that blood flow for your brain to work, or even just getting up and doing some jumping jacks. Or I have a rebounder in my office. So, the mini trampolines, like,
Yeah.
let's just get things moving because it's just, things can get stuck, which then makes us feel tight, anxious, overwhelmed.
Totally. And, the interesting thing is the way that your body talks to you, right, is typically, again, back to how your nervous system is perceiving everything out around you. And if, you get an email that's like, pretty stressful regarding like your website's down or whatever it may be. And like, you can literally feel your physical part of you, like, start to go into like this very survival mode, which is typically manifested in flexion and tension and protection of like everything here, which is like all your organs, your heart and everything. It wants to protect because it's perceiving something as being very stressful.
Right.
And like, it's so great that you have like these strategies. You're like, I'm going to get up, I'm going to do a meditation. And like, that's like your interruption of like not adding into that bucket of, at the end of the day, you're so depleted, you're angry, you're, getting into arguments, right, with your partner, like all these things. It's like you're doing the adequate things to like interrupt that escalation and then get you back regrounded. Yeah.
Right. And I think women have that innate gift to be able to feel, but we're taught so much to disengage from it, to help and be of service to so many other people versus ourselves. So I always tell women, like, being selfish is good for your health and it's good for the people in your life. Like, if we're not taking care of ourselves, we're going to face plummet. When you started recognizing that your body felt like a little off and you started like reconnecting, did you notice your cycle improve once you're able to like kind of realign and reset?
Yeah, it was, it's just interesting. It's, I did start a small supplement as well. And I kind of experimented with that as well. I like went on it, then went off and I was like, oh, it is helping a little bit. So, I always just totally. I always approach any type of change that I put into my lifestyle and my health as an experiment, because I never want any of my clients to feel dependent on any type of one modality. Like, let's have a list, library that you can pick and choose from, but always filtering it through your body's experience. Because while I'm, an expert in how I work with bodies and health and all of that, like, you are the data point, right? You are the one that's experiencing it. So tell me what's going on. So for me, I do the same practice of like, I'm going to try this. Let's see how I feel. And, it's always just this orientation of like, experiment, stay curious. What happened? Did it feel better, different? How do we pivot? And so if we can all kind of get into that framework of like, you're constantly evolving and there's never there's never going to be one solution and there's never anything wrong with you as well. You're just evolving. And with evolution, you also need to, change up your repertoire of like strategies and like healing, coping strategies, like all these things, so that you never feel stagnant, right? Or you never spend enough, like more than enough time feeling like there is something wrong with you.
Right. Because I think that I think in a nutshell explains the human experience, because like the supplements you might take now to heal, you might not need them in like 2 months or a year. So like you're constantly having to flow and evolve, especially with our bodies. Like depending on the cycle, or depending on how much sleep you had, depending on the season that you're in, depending on, are you having children or did you just have children? Like there's so many different life stuff happening that our bodies shift and change. So how can we flow with it versus fight against it?
Totally. And that's so beautifully said, right? Because it's like, you think about how many transitions you've already been through in life and like how much you've learned at this point. Like looking back, you're like, oh yeah, the next time I move states, like I'm definitely going to be more prepared, you know? So it's like
higher movers.
Higher movers. When you think about all of that, it's like, you know, you are constantly adapting. And that's like just such a beautiful part of being a human being, is that we're constantly given these opportunities and these invitations to lean into, of like, this might challenge you a little bit, and especially in business, right? Like lean into this challenge, see what comes up and how do you manage it? And like, you may not know the first time, and that's fine because it's your first time, but the second time, I guarantee your launch, your website, whatever it is, it's going to be more refined. It's going to be more aligned.
Right. Because like definitely being an entrepreneur, like creating a business to help others, like you have that passion, but like, it's just real life. You have to be able to flow with it, especially like I definitely noticed this with my communication from the beginning. Like I would talk to women about balancing their hormones, but for our market, it is not a sexy sell. And I'm like, well, I don't even like it for myself. So like, why am I using that language if I don't even identify with it? So of course things aren't landing. So it's like, you constantly have to like recognize the resistance and how you need to pivot. So like your word pivot, I think is like the perfect word for everything in life. Like,
yeah, especially right now too, right? Like as a business owner, it's like, how do I continue to serve in a way that's like the messaging is still aligned with my values, but then pivoting towards acknowledging what's also going on right now in a way that, again, for me, I like to approach it from a lens of like compassion and empathy. So I'm like, okay, how do I still hear my clientele, still honor everything that they're going through, but still talk to them about why like breathing is still important, especially at a time like right now. Even
especially
at a time like right now. Yeah.
Yeah, because like it's always going to be something. And I think there's definitely been a part of me that has been angry about that. And I don't know if it's like the type A really wants to be a perfectionist, but always has to check that because it's not real. But kind of feeling like I'm always going. I'm always striving to improve or grow. And it can feel exhausting. So it's like recognizing, hey, I might be in a season of, I just did a lot of growth. I need to kind of like sit down and just take stock of what I learned, practice that gratitude, like really have that grounding time before moving forward to the next thing. Because sometimes like we can just feel like we're on that hamster wheel, which, you know, causes a lot of burnout.
Yeah, totally. And again, right, like what you mentioned, it's such a like self-explored like journey where it's like, I mean, I've reached burnout a handful of times and I always thought I was getting better. And maybe I was, right? Maybe the burnout was like a little less intense. It manifested differently, but it's like always, again, that constantly like evolving experience that your body is perceiving in a way that like, okay, felt really terrible after that launch. Like, let me do X, Y, and Z. And how do I want to feel at the end of this, you know? And how do I best prepare for that feeling?
Yeah. Cause I have been so good on the burnout, like kind of like you, where you're like, oh, I'm doing so good. But then like life will happen. So my husband and I got married last May. So it's almost been a year. And I was so burnt out afterwards. And I was like, kind of beating myself up, like, why? And it's like, well, you're running a business on top of planning a wedding. We did our honeymoon like right afterwards. So like, then you're planning a trip. So I was like, oh, you need to have like grace for yourself of all of the big things that were happening on top of your real life. So like, like just even having that mindset of like having to not do everything perfectly or like all at once, you know, it takes a lot of mental mindset work. So I just love that you're able to bring like all of the components together and help women be able to practice that mindfulness so they can feel so much better.
Yeah. And like the word grace too, right? Like just having that compassion. It's like, that's like the secret sauce right now. Like, I feel like that's your best dose of medicine at a time like right now. And even in pockets of life when it feels overwhelming, is like, you know, we're always doing the best we can with given the tools that we have. And it's like, how can we continue to give forgiveness and compassion to ourselves in a way that like, you know, that it's going to make it so much easier for you And
Right.
it's harder initially because it's easier to be like negative and like critical. And it's like, once you step into the work of like having self-compassion, it's like you will grow exponentially faster in a way that's like far more enjoyable.
Yeah. And I think too, like having people in your life that you can lean on. So like me, even just talking to you as like another professional, like this has felt really good because I'm like, oh my gosh, like we just see things the same way. Like you just feel so much more supported and in alignment when you have even just like the support and community around you. Even virtually, you know, like we're able to make those connections. We don't have to have them in our everyday life too.
Totally. And community is so, I mean, it's so important. And I think people are starting to realize that now, like
Yeah.
how much, like we learn from other people, how much we
Yeah.
can, share space over things that are heavy, like shame or guilt, and recognize that like you and I have related on like a ton of topics, in this hour of like, yeah, like I hear that too. I felt that too. And like that commonality is like, it brings you back to being like, wow, we're all human beings really trying to do our best, and
Yeah.
it's so reassuring.
Yeah. Especially too, like knowing a lot of the women watching this are going to go and like work with other women, but like you as the coach too, like you need support. So as much as you're going to be giving to the people in your life, like you have to surround yourself with other people who understand you. Cause like, even when I was starting this business, like my people, my family, my immediate friends didn't get it. And so I'm like, and so them not getting it doesn't mean that they're not supportive. They just can't be as supportive in the way that I needed at that time because they wouldn't want that for themselves. You know, they wanted to do the traditional route, which is fine, but that doesn't mean that then I have to. So it's really fun to be able to connect with other entrepreneurs in this space and just being like, oh my gosh, we connect on so many different levels. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And being an entrepreneur, like that's like, I mean, you have to have a specific personality, a specific type of curiosity and drive to literally have no rules,
Yes.
and to like depend on yourself. And like, when I say that, it's like, you're putting on a trust that like, you're like, my message matters and it should get out to the world,
Yeah.
but you really don't have to do it alone. And I've done a lot of my business on my own.
Yeah.
And then just like a couple of years ago, I was like, oh, there's other female entrepreneurs, right? There's other
Yeah.
people that are doing this work, and I feel seen and I
Yeah.
feel supported and I feel less alone. And like exponentially, like my business is now in a place where like, I'm like, I really want to scale this, and I feel the support that this can happen,
Yeah.
versus like, I don't know if I can do this. And that's normal thoughts too. But
Yes.
imagine if you had that community, right? That's like, you can do this because I believe in what you're sharing. And these are
Right.
the things that, helped me, that will help you, and
Right.
it's just like, I mean, the whole women empowering women thing, it's
Yeah.
like, this is where it can kind of like start to manifest.
Right. And there's so many different levels because I honestly don't know if I would have been able to get through, especially the early days and the like when you're trying to figure things out. I felt very stressed because there's no system, right? Like you have to create the system, you have to create the structure, you have to figure out what this is. And when you create something out of nothing, you don't know that. So
Yeah.
definitely in those early days, like surrounding yourself with people who they don't necessarily have to be on the same path, but they need to be cheering you on because it's tough if you're not like, getting that support.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. So I know you have a free gift to offer everybody. I think it was a course on understanding our
Oh,
metabolism a little better. If you want to share
yeah.
a little bit
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. So a lot of, my work talks about like the metabolism piece. And I think traditionally what I see when someone is trying to quote unquote heal their metabolism, improve their metabolism, is like, okay, eat small, frequent meals, train high intensity, right? It's very traditional protocols, which never worked for my body. It just moved
Mhm.
me more into fight or flight. It made me feel more stressed. It made me binge. It made me more anxious. So
Same. Yeah.
I was like, there's something to be said about that. And I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure that people feel this.
Yeah.
So one huge component when we talk about metabolism is that it's understanding how you breathe and how to reconnect to your breath, how to do effective breathing for your body, how to even understand the predominant breathing muscle, which is your diaphragm, and how do you move that. So the whole course is laid around, yes, it's called healing your metabolism, but it's such an interesting approach from the standpoint that I'm not encouraging you to sweat more, eat less. It's like, let's get you out of fight or flight and let's work on your parasympathetic by restoring the way you breathe in an effective way where you can just really, really, really reground and reconnect your body so that you can start building that trust. So then it's no longer in this kind of constant stress state of like, I need to, you know, hold on to extra calories. I need to make sure she binges. I need to make sure she's super tired so she rests. So a huge part of my recovery was definitely what I coach in that course, about just how am I breathing? How can I go about rehabbing that in a way that then has this very global like improvement of how I feel.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love that approach. So I'm going to be sharing the link in the show notes so people can sign up for that course, because it's just so helpful to be able to learn from each other too. So it's like, I haven't learned the breathing part of metabolism, and I'm like, yeah, I want to learn that. So I'm going to go sign up for this free course, because everything just comes together. So I love being able to connect with women like you too, who's out there doing such amazing, wonderful things. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been such a pleasure talking with you. And I'm so excited for people to learn more about your work, how they can use breathing to benefit our metabolism. Like, honestly, it's the first time I've heard that. So I'm like super excited. But thank you so much for being here.
You're so welcome.